the more humble we become.
Yeah.
Like that's, and God forces that, like, no joke, either learn it easy, which is choose to be humble. Or he'll make sure that, pieces of your brain and your body start to decay in ways that are like, it's one thing to be a 25-year-old who thinks they know everything, and then another to be a 50-year-old that thinks they know everything and then is suddenly discovering that they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know how, even though they're not the same exact thing, how oftentimes being humble requires being humiliated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're not the same thing, but
No.
sometimes we're so stubborn and prideful that we have to be in a place where we get humiliated to understand the true meaning and the necessity for humility.
Welcome to this episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to be talking about reasonable expectations in marriage. That implies that there are some. Maybe there are, maybe there are not. But if you go in with wrong expectations or too many or unreasonable ones, guess what? You are going to blow your marriage up. And with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove, today, and we are digging in to this particular topic because he and I both see people on a weekly basis, daily basis, he more than I on that space, but it's apparent that expectations can ruin a marriage. But there are some things that we need to be aware of, that we should have in place, that we should be thinking about expectation-wise of ourselves and our partner if we want to do marriage well. So Kyle, good to be together. Where do you want to start with this?
I don't really know. There's so many places we could start. I'm sitting here thinking, as you're making our introductions today, that it's 2022. And I wonder how many male persons like myself are getting married, in the 21st century, and anticipating that the expectations that they have of their wife are the same ones that Ward Cleaver had for June.
Well, probably not that many, right?
And I'm wondering how well that plays, if in fact that is the case.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things that have changed. I think the expectations of each role, the husband and the wife in the marriage over, the years I've been alive, which starts with a 6 now. Ooh. And the culture sticks its hand in there and stirs around a little bit. Our faith sticks its hand and stirs things around a little bit. There are a lot of different contributing factors. And the truth of the matter is that even with that in mind, there are probably no two couples anywhere where the expectations one has of the other spouse are going to be identical or according to any specific list.
That is so true. And I think that's more true now than it's ever been, thanks to the internet. We picked up a puppy a couple of weeks ago from an Amish family, and they're using cell phones now. And they all still were, in the bonnets and the dresses that were homemade, all the things. And yet they're texting me. I had a moment where I was like, wait, what?
What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. And no, it wasn't a puppy mill, by the way. I know some of those places have reputations for that, but no, it wasn't that. This dog is very special. And we checked him out before we got him. But, I was thinking, as you were speaking, about a client of mine, who gave me permission to share this story anywhere, by the way. And this is not against men in general, because I also have plenty of stories that it's the opposite way around with a different context. But she was telling me that when they first got married a couple of years ago, she was working a job where she had an hour-long commute one direction. And so they leave to work a little bit around the same time. He went in earlier than she did. He was higher up in the management profile than she was at, different companies, obviously. But, so she'd leave and then get to work and work all day. And then she'd leave work about the same time he did. And she'd get home and he'd been there for an hour and he's mad. And so after about like a week or so of this, she's like, what's going on? Like, why are you upset with me? And he's like, well, my mother had dinner on the table every single night for my dad.
Was his name Beaver?
No, well, you mentioned June. And this is like recent, right? And she's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, I have an hour-long commute. I work fewer hours than you do. Like, you're here. Like, you could make dinner. And he was incensed over that.
She's not even there when he gets home.
Exactly. Like, for an hour, she's driving. And then I don't know how well, she ended up working it out. But the expectation, to your point this earlier, is that those things needed to be changed. And so many of the expectations we have when we come into marriage are based off of things with people that we're not married to. Like, we're not married to our parents, but the way that we grew up infiltrates this. And in some cases, it really should. Like, the best should be there. Absolutely. And that's how people learn, is through modeling. But there's some stuff that's just kind of jacked up. And that would be one of them.
Yeah. I remember, if you don't mind me sharing a personal story.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this one's on me. I remember my first son being born, and the first argument after the first son had been born in the category of marital bliss occurred after my mother showed up. Mm-hmm. To stay for about a week and help out, which was definitely needed. Mm-hmm. And appreciated. However, the day after we had come home from the hospital, my mother was there waiting for us, and it became, we talked about it's time to give my oldest son his first bath. And so Mom goes in the kitchen and starts filling up the big old kitchen sink with warm water and, and the baby soap and this, that, and the other, and the little baby chair that sits down inside the sink and mm-hmm. And my then wife pulls me aside and says, I was planning on bathing him in the bathtub. I don't really want to do it in the kitchen sink. And me, the deep thinker that I was at that time, said, she's done this with 3 kids. I think she knows what she's doing. Mm. In case you're wondering, listening to this podcast, that is not the thing as a young husband to say to your wife who just gave birth to your first child. Mm. I definitely wasn't thinking, and not sure I was capable of thinking at that point in my life, at least not as deep as I needed to. And so I had an expectation of my very young wife at that point that she would see the lead of my mother and follow it. Mm-hmm. We had never discussed this before. It was not part of any class that we went to. They definitely didn't talk about stuff like this in our Lamaze classes. No.
What to do with the mother-in-law wasn't there? Are you
exactly. Sure? So we stumble in, I think, making assumptions about what our roles are going to be as husbands and as wives. And so also when we come to start thinking about this, or just to asking this question, what are the things we can expect of one another mm-hmm. realistically? I think we have to stay a little bit vague. I don't think we can get real pointed with answers here. Mm-hmm. And let me just start with the one I was talking about just now. I think it's important that we limit the assumptions that we make. I don't think we can ever get rid of them. But understanding that we're going to be making assumptions and some of them are going to be inaccurate.
Right. Boom.
is very important, because we're going to think or just presume that our spouse is going to do things or say things or play a role in this relationship that they're not expecting at all.
Mm-hmm.
Our experiences have been different. We did not grow up in the same houses with the same parents. Our role models have been different. Therefore, our expectations are likely going to be different, no matter how much we've tried to prepare.
It's interesting that you highlight the whole upbringing thing and how it's different. And honestly, it doesn't matter if people have been married 2 years, 2 months, or 40 years. Like some of the people I work with, they're still dealing with expectations off of how their parents did family.
Yeah.
And they've been married to this person, fighting this same issue for 40 years. And it's like, at what point can you enter reality and see that you're not married to your parents? You're not married to your siblings. You're married to this person who is wildly different than you are. We usually marry our opposite in so many ways. And that person's there to refine you, not because they're better than you, but often, and this is, I mean, I'm just going to say I did this to my spouse. I think it happens to every spouse, like no matter who you are, but we put them in situations that they have no intentions of ever being in, and they don't want any part of, because we are so different than they are. And then we have to navigate that and learn to do it through the power of the Holy Spirit, which requires maturity on our part. And so when one of the things that I love to tell people when they're dealing with stuff like this is ask questions like, how do you know that? When they say, well, you're supposed to blah, blah, blah. Well, how do you know that? Like, where's that coming from? I'm interested in where that originates for you. Well, my mom always, well, that's awesome. And so then I get the choice of, am I going to do it this way so that that person feels like, they're getting this comforty thing from their mom or whatever it is? Or is that like so out of my realm of possibilities? I'm going to say, well, I love you and I hate to disappoint you, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm not that. And I've been trying, but that is not going to be a thing that ever emerges here.
Well, and understand too, what I watched, or what any of us watched our parents do and not do, and that, the things that they brought to the relationship, the marriage relationship. By the time we get into our own, we're talking about a generation later.
Right.
We're talking about, the fact that society and culture and expectations in these relationships have changed a great deal from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. So we can't pull in what happened 20, 25, 30 years ago and just plant it here and think that it's going to work every time.
Yeah.
Because it's not.
Yeah, that is so true. And, and at the same time, we have to be careful because biblical truth is still biblical truth, right? Yeah. And so, you're navigating that space. And one of the things that has changed in our culture is how men and women work together. In the 40s with the war effort, women were in the workplace now, boom, like in ways they'd never been. They're in the factories, they're doing all sorts of things. And that has not changed. But the way that women and men interact has totally changed from the way that we were in the 30s. And so we have to understand that. So if I have an issue with lust, I'm going to have an issue with lust, whether I'm in the workplace or not. Like that just makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But the point then is, do we, how do we be in the world, not of it, which has always been a thing. And the world keeps changing. Even though there's nothing new under the sun, those temptations are still going to be there. But we can rise to the occasion. We can navigate those things. I'm really blessed, and I hope I don't get like slammed now for saying this aloud. But I have been so blessed in that, any affairs, that kind of thing, like I have my own temptation things, but that has not been a thing for me. And I'm really thankful around that. Like I have friends of mine, they're professional women that have had struggles with that. And I'm thankful that the Lord has protected me from that. I've only only been interested in the man that I've married, right? Like 100%. And I'm really glad around that. But what's also true is that in that space, it doesn't faze me to go to a meeting with someone of the opposite sex, right?
Right.
I don't think twice about it. And now in this day and age, it's like, it doesn't matter what gender. Like, okay, so maybe that's a man, maybe that's a woman, maybe it's a woman who likes women now. Like everything's different. Well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to work now because of what no, I'm going to know who I am in Christ. I'm going to go do the things, right? But that impacts marriages, because if you grew up and your mom never left the house and didn't work professionally, or if she did and she only associated with women, then you're in this situation and your wife has this professional stuff to do and she's interacting with men. That makes it a little bit different for you, I'm sure. So tough stuff to navigate.
It is. Another one that I think is worthy of spending a couple of minutes on is respecting one another's boundaries. And that also, I think, plays a little bit on the concept of the assumptions, because I've had, well, I don't know how many, but several different experiences as a therapist with couples who, and it's usually the husband, I have to confess, who says, well, in a good marriage, I don't think we should have set boundaries. I don't think that boundaries should be a part of a good, trusting, wholesome marriage, and, I think that individual is forgetting about the individual thing, forgetting that it is two individuals coming into this marriage. And sometimes, life has provided some experiences for one or both of those individuals where they have been, they've been damaged, they've been hurt.
Yeah.
They've been scarred. And as a result, it's important for them to be able to set some specific personal boundaries. And it's important for us as individuals in those relationships and in marriages to respect that boundary of our spouse. And it might not always be convenient, and it might not always be the way that we wish it were. But I think boundaries are something that probably occur more as the relationship grows after some time has passed. As we get more attuned to one another, we start being able to say, this is something that I need, and I need for you to understand it and respect it. If you need me to express it or explain it any further, I'll do my best. But the primary thing I need here is for you to respect this boundary.
We start out these relationships so head over heels in love that we make this incorrect assumption that the person knows us, when really we're just drunk on hormones.
We don't even know ourselves.
No, we don't. And then reality hits when the hormones have worn off and the wedding's over. And then here we are. And it's like, what do I do? This person's crossing all these things. And like, how do I find myself in this situation? And it's, well, that's why the boundaries then start coming into play. And I work with a number of women that have, they're so brave and they're beautiful and incredible people. They have survived sexual trauma as children usually, and they come into marriage and a lot of them threw themselves under a bus in the physical space. And then they wake up from that and they're like, I feel like I'm betraying myself by doing whatever it is. And it's like, okay, so have a conversation with your husband around that. Like, for real, talk to him, tell him what you're feeling. Don't accuse him of XYZ because he's not your perp. He didn't do that to you. You're having an issue and you need his help healing from that. So figure out what you need in that space and then ask for it.
And sometimes it's as simple as being observant.
How so?
Well, I can tell you for sure that Danny never had to tell me not to speak to her until she'd had her coffee.
Oh,
I figured that one out real quick. That was a boundary that I needed to respect, is if I don't have a coffee cup in my hand first thing in the morning, matter of fact, if it's not more than half gone, you probably shouldn't say anything to me.
I'm sorry that you understand that. I mean, and my heart is in alignment with Danny's. Like, I get this way too deeply. You and I are kindred spirits in that space.
Yeah. And see, I pretty much spring out of the bed, and I enjoy my coffee too, but once I'm awake and once my feet hit the floor, I wake up. And that not everybody's that way, but
Yeah,
that's
like
just
I
a
don't
simple example.
understand people like you, but you go you know.
Yeah, go
Yeah.
you. Yeah, yeah. Well, before we close up today, I wanted to just throw one more,
Yeah.
encouragement in there to couples in relationships and marriages about allowing some time for each other to have a learning curve. When it comes to what can we expect? What are reasonable expectations of men and women in marriage relationships? Um, it's a list that doesn't exist. It's kind of a moving target, so to speak, in
Yeah.
some ways. So, I don't care if you're 20 or 60 in a new relationship, there has to be some grace that gives one another the opportunity to go through a learning curve. To say, I got to figure you out, you have to figure me out. And for those of us, who are in those upper echelons of age, we realize that these are things that the learning curve never stops.
Yeah.
It may not be as steep now as it was when we were in our 20s and 30s and so forth, but it's still moving uphill.
Mm-hmm.
That learning curve we never get to a point where, well, is it uphill or downhill? I don't know. I'm not very good at geometry and all that stuff, but I know it's a curve, and I know it doesn't end. I know that learning continues. And sometimes, truthfully, as we get into, the age where we are, it gets funnier. Mm-hmm. Because I never knew that. That's kind of funny, or the things that we figure out about one another are more likely to be laughed at than to be offended by.
Exactly. Yeah. The more humble we become, like that's, and God forces that, like, no joke, either learn it easy, which is choose to be humble. Or he'll make sure that, pieces of your brain and your body start to decay in ways that are like, it's one thing to be a 25-year-old who thinks they know everything, and then another to be a 50-year-old that thinks they know everything and then is suddenly discovering that they don't. Yeah.
And you know how, even though they're not the same exact thing, how oftentimes being humble requires being humiliated.
Yeah.
And they're not the same thing, but sometimes we're so stubborn and prideful that we have to be in a place where we get humiliated to understand the true meaning and the necessity for humility.
Well, wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes, right? So I don't want that thing to happen to me. So I'm going to try.
Part of it is based on other people's mistakes, saying, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. But if we're fools, we have to learn it the hard way ourselves over and over and over again. And, I think we all have some of that in us too. I don't want to sound like all that. You've heard that. You're funny.
Read it in a book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go you. You and your pre-coffee self. You got it all going on today, sir. That's funny. Yeah. So bottom line, we go in to marriage with expectations. It's reasonable to set expectations for behavior and then navigate them when they're not being met. And the way that we do that needs to be loving and grace-filled. We need to say, hey, can we have a do-over? I don't like how that all was said. Can we try that again? And can you say that in a way as if you actually like me, and throw some humor in there, and, but whatever it is, but you want to hold people to a higher standard of being in the spaces relationally. And we also want to hold ourselves to those standards.
And the flip side of that is that it's reasonable to expect that some of our expectations will be unrealistic.
Yes.
To think that we're not going to have any of those is silly.
Right.
It's seeing yourself in a light that's much better and smarter and bigger than you really are.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are going to be some surprises.
I had a conversation with somebody today where they were talking about some leadership challenges that they had, and leadership is messy, right?
Yes.
And we talked about several other places where they were in leadership and it was messy. And I'm like, yeah, so what's your expectation around leadership? And it's like, well, it's not supposed to be like this. Because we're all Christian. I'm like, yeah, I know. Wouldn't that be cool? If we were all Jesus 100% of the time. Unfortunately, we're mostly human most of the time.
That's the way it is.
It is the way it is. And so, with ourselves, how do I show up in love here? That's a question. That's a what to say. How do I listen to the Holy Spirit? Lord, help. That's another what to say.
Me again.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, just wild gratitude. Thank you, God, for all these challenges, because they're the things that shape us and mature us into his image.
Exactly.
Well, thank you guys for popping by today to listen as we talked about expectations in marriage. Be sure to check out our free download on our website, greaterimpact.org. And that'll help you stop walking on eggshells in your relationships. And be sure to check out the next episode as we deal with conflict and how to resolve it.